Hello friends, and welcome to Lesson 10 on learning CircuitPython on the Circuit Playground Bluefruit. In this lecture, you've got the beat. We're going to build a better Cap Touch through lists, and by doing that, we're also going to build a Capacitive Touch drum machine. We're going to learn how to hook up the CPB to pretty much any speaker that's got an RCA jack on it, and we'll experiment with some Euro beats and fruit drums. Let's get at it. In the last video, we got started with CircuitPython and Capacitive Touch. So now let's take a look at another way that we can set up touchpads so that we don't have to do them one at a time here. And it'll also make it a little bit easier for us to reference our touchpads too. Remember how we set up our colors? We did this in a list. Colors bracket 0 is red, color bracket 1 is orange, color bracket 2 is yellow, and so on. Well, we can do the same thing when we set up our touchpads. And this is how we're going to do it. So we're going to create a list called pads. And inside of that, instead of putting the colors in, we're going to say board.a1, board.a2, all the way down through board.tx. So pads is a list. And remember, these lists are indexed starting at 0. So pads open bracket 0, close bracket is going to be board.a1. Pads open bracket 1, close bracket is going to be board a2, all the way up to pads open bracket 6, close bracket. That's going to be board TX. So now instead of having to refer to individually board.t1 all the way to board.tx, we can just refer to pads and then whatever the index value is in here to get to the board pad that we want. So this is a two-step process. First, we take board.a1 through board.tx, and by putting them in the array, we essentially give them a name. Pads 0 through 7. Then once we've named them, we put those names through touchio.touchIn, and what that's going to do is it's going to turn them on, making them ready to accept touch. But if pad 0 is the first one and pads 6 is the last one, what we can do is we can use a for loop, and we could say, okay, just go through, start at pads bracket 0, close bracket, and go all the way to pads bracket 6, close brackets. And instead of calling these things touchpad A1 through A6, we're going to create a list called touchpad. So the touchpad, where we say touchpad equals and then open and close bracket, there's nothing in there. But by saying for 1 in range, and len is the length of pads, which means we start at 0, we go all the way to 6, because there are 7 elements in the list called pads, we'll go through I from 0 to 6, and what we're going to do is create touchio touchIn pads 0. That sets up the pad so that it can accept touch, and that's going to be touchpad 0. And then pads 1 is going to be touchpads 1, pad 2 is going to be touchpad 2, all the way down to touchpads 6 is going to be touchpad 6, and that's board.tx. So by doing these statements here, we avoid having to write this multiple times, and we just have to refer to the one variable, touchpad, and then whatever index we want. So now that we've got this set up, let's take a look at the advantage of this. So remember, when we had a separate variable for each of the different touchpads 1, 2, 3, we had to have a separate if statement for each of the different conditions. So if 1 was touched, 2 was touched, 3 was touched. And if we've got to do this for all 7 pads, then we're going to have 7 of these if blocks. But look what we can do down here. In our while true loop, we can simply say, hey, go through all of the touchpads. So length says go through all of 0 through 6, because the list length is 7. It'll start off at 0 here. It'll say, hey, if touchpad 0.value, meaning it's true that touchpad 0 is being touched. Remember, what is touchpad 0? Oh, that's board 1, so that's A1. Then we're going to fill all of our pixels or all of our lights with the color 0. And the color 0 is, just to go back up here, that's the first one in our colors list, which is red. So if you touch on this, so this would be if you touch on A1. If you touch on A2, it'll be orange. A3, it'll be yellow. All the way to 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Indigo is the last one because we only have 7 touchpads that we're checking. But each time we go through while true, which is forever, it's an infinite loop, we're going to go and check all of the touchpads 0 through 6, and we'll light the one that was touched up with the appropriate color 0 through 6. Let's give it a try. So I'm going to head back over to Moo. And instead of creating these 3 different touchpads up here, I'll just say set up touchpads. And the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to create that array called pads. So we'll say pads equals open bracket, and then we're going to put in board.a1. And I'll just backspace here. I'm just going to copy boards.a, and then I can put in 1 with a comma in between each, and then paste in 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And I have to remember that the 7th one is TX, so it's not ATX, it's just TX. And close that with a close bracket. And I'll just put a comment in here that reminds me what this is going to be. So I'm going to say create an empty list named touchpad. And then, whoops. And then underneath that, I'll say touchpad equals open and close bracket. That just means, hey, this is going to be a list with nothing inside of it initially. But then what we're going to do is we're going to loop through all elements of pads and create the touchpad list. So we'll say down here for I in range len, and that's going to be the length of the pads list, and then close that with a colon. And then underneath we'll say touchpad dot, and the append command we're going to do here just adds another element to the array. So we start off with nothing in it, but we're going to go through this 7 different times. And the first time we're going to append in touchio dot capital touch capital in open parentheses pads open bracket I close bracket close parenthesis close one more parenthesis. It'll go through all of the pads 0 through 6, and it will create a touchpad element 0 through 6 as well. Cool. So once we've got all of that done, instead of having this big long if statement or multiple if statements for each of our different pads, we can, I'm just going to backspace over these statements underneath while true colon, and I'm going to type in, indented here, for I, oops, that's for I in, and it's going to be range, and it's going to be len, so range, open parentheses, len to find the length, open parentheses, touchpad, close parentheses, and colon, and then press enter, and we'll be indented again, and we'll say if touchpad open bracket I close bracket dot value colon, and then press enter. We'll be indented again, and we'll say pixels dot fill open parentheses color open bracket I close bracket and close parentheses. And what we're going to do is we are going to go through all of our touchpad array from 0 to 6. And if any of those are touched, then what we're going to do is we are going to fill them in with the appropriate color 0 through 6 that matches the pad that was touched. However, we're going to see there's just a little bit of thing that we want to change. So we'll take a look and then we'll modify this. I'm going to go up here and I'm going to say, ooh, I say elements. I should go ahead and change that. Sorry, my bad spelling. Elements. And I'll go ahead and click on save. Let's see how things look on our CPB. And A1 is red, and there's orange, and we've got yellow in there, and a light green, and there's indigo and blue, and all the way down to green, all these different colors you can try out. We are looking good. The one thing we haven't done yet, though, is we haven't turned off the colors if none of the pads are being touched. Let's take a look at how we can do that, and we'll learn some new techniques. So here's how we'll tackle this problem. Since we go through and check to see if all the pads are touched, if we do see that one is being touched, what we want to do is we want to say, hey, it's being touched, and if it's being touched, we don't want to turn off the lights. However, if nothing is being touched, then what we want to do is we want to turn all of the pixels, filling them in with black. So how are we going to do this? We're going to create a new variable called touched. It's going to be a Boolean value, which means it can be either true or false. And we'll initially set it to false. We're going to assume that there is no touch. Now, if we go through here inside the if statement where we say if a touchpad has been touched, if touchpad I dot value that is true, then what we're going to do down here is we're going to set touched to true. So now let's think about this. If we start off with touched as false and we go through all of the touchpads 0 through 6, if any one of them is touched, then we'll change touched to true. So it doesn't matter which one is touched, as long as one is touched, it's going to be true. Now, after we've gone through all 7 of the touchpads, then we fall down here and we have this statement where we say if touched equals false. Now, the equals is a comparison. We say compare what's on the left-hand side to the right-hand side. If they're equal, if touch equals false, then that's a true statement. That's different from the equal sign here, which is assignment, where we take what's on the right-hand side and assign it to the left-hand side. But here we're comparing is touched equal to false. Now, if something was touched, it is not true that touched is false because something was touched and we've changed this false value to true. So we are going to skip what's in here, which is fill pixels to black. And we will never turn the pixels to black as long as something is being touched. However, as soon as we go through all 7 of the touchpads and none of them has been touched, because again, remember, we go through this while true constantly. And after we've checked all 7, then we check to see if we should turn things black. If not, we'll go back up here. We'll go through all 7 again. And if nothing is being touched at that point, well, since we reset touch to false and we have never touched, so we've never gotten inside this portion of the if statement here, when we get down here, touched is going to be equal to false. So in that case, we will set all of the pixels to black and turn off our CPX. So let's code this together. So we'll go down to our while true loop. And the first thing that we want to do is every time we go through while true, we're going to set up this new value here called touched. And we'll first say touched equals false. So every time we're going to assume nothing has been touched. So if nothing has been touched, just to show right in the end here, after we're done with our for loop, what we want to do is we want to shut off all of the pixels. We want to turn the pixels black. So underneath the entire for loop and the if statement that's inside and the pixels change in here. And watch where I've indented. So the if statement is even with the for statement, which means it's not inside for, which means it executes after the for loop is done. I'm going to say if touched equals capital false, and I'm going to put a colon after this. Now, if touched equals false, that means we haven't had a touch. And if we haven't had a touch, then what we want to do is we want to say pixels.fill, open parentheses, black, close parentheses. Now, what are we going to do if something was touched though? Well, inside here we say if touchpad I.value. That means something is being touched. And if something is being touched, what we're going to do is we're going to say touched equals true. So we think through how this code works. When we set touch to false, we will go through all 7 of our touchpads next. If nothing is touched, touched remains false. And so we will say if touched, which is false, equals false, shut off all of the pixels. However, if we go through, and again, after we get to our last statement under while true, we restart the while true loop. We reset touch to false. We once again check all the touchpad values 0 through 6 to see if any of them is being touched. And if any of them is touched, then touch, which we had assigned to false, is going to turn true. And if touch turns true, then when we get down here, since true is not equal to false, we are never going to turn things black. We're going to restart. We're going to set touch to false again. We're going to say, hey, is anything being touched again? We'll do this over and over and over again. Let's see how this works in action. I'll click on save. We'll look at our CPX in action here, and let's see. Are we going to change thing? There's red. Oh, and it goes away when we stop touching. And there's orange, and there's yellow. And this is light green, and green, and blue, and indigo, all the way here. So we can see, you take your finger off. This works exactly as we want to do. So we created a variable to act as a flag, and we reset this every time we wanted to reinitiate the test. Good work. And now, since we learned so much about lists, here is your challenge. So if you've downloaded the samples that we'd used previously, you should have files on your CPB that have these names: bass hit C, BD tech, BD zone, drum cowbell, elect cymbal wave, elect high snare, and scratch.wave. And it's important they're right at the root level in your CircuitPy volume, not inside any folder. And so if you create a list that has an element for each of these sounds, can you set it up so that when one of the capacitive touch pads is touched, it will play that respective sound and show that respective color? Pause here, give it a shot, and let's see what you come up with. So after tackling this, some of you might say, was it really supposed to be that easy? And in fact it is. Once you master some of these components like lists, you can recognize how easy it is to cobble together code that you want to behave in certain ways. So right underneath where we say enable the speaker, and you could really put this just about anywhere, but make sure it's before your function and your while true loop. And I'll write a comment here that says define the drum samples list. And on the next line, I'll create this list variable called drum samples and say that equals, and then open a bracket. And then inside, I'm going to put in the names of all of those WAV files that are on my disk. Now, you want to be absolutely sure you spell these correctly. The names are properly enclosed inside of double quotes. There's a comma separating each value. But once that's done, you've got an array that has the names of all of our sample files. Be sure to close your list off with a square bracket And now what we're going to do is go down into our code, and at the same spot where we change our colors right underneath, I'm just going to say play file. Remember that function that we wrote? And then in parentheses, what I'm going to pass in is going to be drum samples I. That's it. So now if we go up and we select save, let's see if we got a drum. All right, so hopefully you can hear that. I'm scratching away. Things are looking good. Now, here are some project tips. The CPB doesn't have a very powerful speaker, but if you want to augment that, you can actually clip any of these inexpensive alligator clips, one to the ground, which is GND, and the other to A0, which also says audio out. Now you want to clip the ground end to the sleeve of any standard speaker that has one of these RCA jacks. So the sleeve is the part that's closest to the wire. And then you want to take the A0 and clip it to the end of this jack. And once you do this, you can send audio out to any speaker. This is a standard iPod speaker, but it works with headphones, it works with guitar amps. So let's give it a listen. Much better. You can hook clips up to any of the pins in here, and when you touch them, the sound will go off. And you can clip these clips to all sorts of things, including, well, if you want to do some Europop, maybe hook it up to a Euro. And then if you touch the Euro, you are the ace of base. Now, there are all sorts of materials that can carry a conductive touch. They include copper tape, conductive paint. If you visited my office and tapped Baby Groot on the leaves, you can hear that he speaks. I am Groot. And you can hook up some fruit. Rock on, programmer, and keep at it.